the minimum wage. So I'm going to try to keep it focused today, which is a challenge for me. It's like opening up a gate and all the puppies running into the yard. You're trying to figure out where they're going to go. That's my brain. But I got two guys on here that can help me keep this whole thing focused and on the rails. First one I'll bring up is my buddy Eric Buchanan, who's kind of been a part of these conversations from the start. How you doing, Eric?
Good, Clint. How are you?
Man, I am good. It's going to be a good topic. I'm going to bring our next guest up, and we may have a couple other folks joining us later. We'll see if their time avails to them. So another guy that's been on with me several times, well known in this area, business and politics and life. What's up, Brandon Lewis?
Lord, the room just went down a couple notches. Sorry.
Well,
I do my best.
I feel naked without a beard. I just realized I'm in the middle between two handsome men with beards.
I know. I don't think in the legal profession, I think beards are frowned upon in the courtroom. I think they've done studies on it.
I know a lot of younger attorneys now, and by younger, I mean under 40, have beards, and even some in their 40s. It's gotten to be more normal.
I use the analogy of puppies roaming the yard for my brain. And so I'm really going to depend on you two for some focus, but I reached,
sorry, we're already off track talking about beard.
Yeah, that's good. We're talking minimum wage. How's your beard today, Brandon? No, it's great.
Good, pretty good.
Well, now here's this whole conversation, we do our Monday conversations at 11 a.m. of, by, and for the people, conversations centered around the American experiment. And I love those conversations. They're educational. Sometimes we rant. We talk about trending topics. Today is one that I posted several times about the minimum wage. And my feedback is always, I find enlightening, mixed. And my folks are usually pretty good. They don't get into too many arguments on my page. But it did show a split. And what I have found is usually when people are split on a topic like this, it's not because they have ill intent, like most people, like most of us. We don't have ill intent when we disagree with somebody. It's either they have a personal experience with a topic, or they just don't know the other person's side of the topic that well, or they may and just still disagree, which is okay. But I think conversations like this, like we're about to have, are very good because it's going to give some insight, hopefully, to both sides. Now, I have an article. I have 2 or 3 articles pulled up. One of them represents the pros and cons of a minimum wage. And I thought those would be good jumping off points for both of you to give some experience. But before we go down that road, 30 seconds or less. Eric, I know people know you, but in this conversation, you're a business owner. Tell people who you are, what you do. And if you want to give an idea of your stance on the minimum wage, this is your opportunity before I start asking questions. Then, Brandon, it's your turn.
Sure, I'll be quick. So I am an attorney in Chattanooga, Tennessee. I have my own business. I'm a small business owner, 15 employees. I helped manage my dad's firm for about 6 years, from the late 90s till 2003 when I opened my own law firm. So we're coming up on 18 years of me owning a law firm. I help disabled people fight insurance companies, occasionally do other type of insurance work for the individual who has the policy. We have 6 attorneys and several paralegals, a great team put together. And we fight hard for our clients. And one of the ways we do this is to ensure we have a great team of hardworking people that are willing to do a great job. And I don't think about the minimum wage because I pay my employees what they're worth and what they earn. And I think we're a good paying law firm for the economy that we have here in East Tennessee. We do help people nationally. And it's one of the benefits of having a law firm in Chattanooga, that we can have a talented team that's willing to work hard. And we don't have to, our employees don't have to pay to live like they're in New York City or Los Angeles.
Brandon, who are you, buddy? And tell me a little your stance if you want to.
I'm with TennesseeConservativeNews.com. You can follow us on social media platforms, etc. And we just give a conservative alternative on news and accounts at the state, local, and national level. In the state of Tennessee, we really only have 2 conservative outlets for typical run-of-the-mill news so that people can stay informed, and we're the second one of those. And as you read headlines in local publications and broadsheets, you see that they hate conservatives, they hate conservatism, and they hate our candidates. And page after page is just them telling us that our policies and principles don't work, when we know if you look at cities that are ran the other way, it goes the opposite direction. And so we're just there to basically help hold Republicans accountable to be conservative and to also highlight the positive effects of conservative policy and many of the negative drawbacks of more leftist policies. And so I also run a business like Eric. This is my second business, I guess. I run an academy for professional painting contractors where I help hundreds of small business owners in 6 different countries run their businesses more efficiently through a variety of different programs. And that's what I do. So I see the effects on small business each and every day. I have hundreds of conversations, and I know what the impacts are.
Well, you've also experienced those impacts as a business owner. You know what it is. You know, I've owned several small businesses, but I've managed some radio stations, sales part in the radio stations, but most of my employees were 1099s. That's a majority of my experience, but it doesn't mean I'm not versed in the business world. I have a lot of business friends that did a radio show for years about business. And so with all that being said, I'm going to throw it out. I want to start this conversation with minimum wage, and yes or no. Eric, are you for a minimum wage? Yes or no? And if that requires more, go for it.
I'm against it.
Okay, good. Brandon, your turn, sir.
Well, this is not going to be a very even-handed panel because I share Mr. Buchanan's viewpoint on this subject.
But I think the why is important because here's why. I saw number of my posts, and I'll say this now, and I've seen it on other people's posts because I'll read, and especially when I see that there's engagement, I hear people say things like, if a company cannot pay minimum wage, then they're doing something wrong. If they cannot pay their employees livable wages, they need to take less. They don't. And I think a lot of that goes back to what I said at the beginning. A lot of people don't understand what goes into an employee and the cost of an employee and what really is a dollar's worth of value. So, and I think you guys will share that. So let's just jump into it. I got a pro and a con. The very first one of this article, which by the way is a really good article, BritannicaProcon.org. It's a reliable, nonpartisan, empowering website. It's what it says about itself. I think I'm going to come up with something like that. An empowering.
We certainly need more of those nonpartisan pro and con conversations, don't we?
Well, listen to this. I mean, this is not bad. It gives the pro and con right here. First one, raising minimum wage would increase economic activity and spur job growth. Now I've got the con, but I figured 2 smart guys like you can hear that pro and pretty much counter that. So the first pro is it's going to increase economic activity and spur job growth. Anybody want to jump in on that one? Because I've got an idea.
You want to go first, Brandon?
Yeah, you go for it, Eric.
All right. So spurring job growth just doesn't make any sense. I'm just going to start by saying this. I've heard conservatives be accused of being science deniers because we don't always agree with the same experts on certain topics like climate change or the pandemic. And it's not that we don't believe in science. It's that we don't always agree with the conclusions of certain experts. And I'm going to put this squarely in the camp of where progressives don't believe in economics. When you believe that increasing the amount of money that employers have to pay is somehow going to mean that employers are going to hire more people, that just doesn't make any sense. The simple law of supply and demand, simple economics, that if an employer has 100 employees at $10 an hour, now all of a sudden she has to pay them $15 an hour, unless she's going to raise all her prices and still have customers buy the product at the same amount, then that employer is going to have to let a third of those people go to have the same employment costs. And most employers don't run on this magic giant profit machine where they have a huge profit margin, that when the cost of labor goes up, they've got to make up for it somewhere, and they're going to raise the prices on all their customers and either lose customers or it's going to cause everybody everywhere to raise prices. A couple other simple things to think about. That the cost of an employee is somewhere between 1.5 to 2 times whatever you're actually paying them. So if you're paying somebody $10 an hour, $15 an hour, let's just use $20 an hour. If you're paying somebody $20 an hour, by the time you include their Social Security, FICA taxes, the cost of their health insurance, the cost of the overhead related to employing that employee for having whether it's computers at home or whether it's having an office space, by the time you add all that up, if you pay them $20, it's probably costing the employer somewhere between $30 and $40 an hour to have that employee. So when you start raising the minimum wage, you're actually raising an even higher cost related to the taxes and insurance related to those people. And the higher it costs to hire people, the more it costs to hire people, the fewer people that are going to get hired. There's the old analogy that if you want something to go away, the government can tax it more. If you want to discourage people from smoking, you raise the taxes on cigarettes. If you want people to stop drinking, you raise the taxes on alcohol. If you want people to stop hiring people, you raise the cost of hiring new people.
That's the shortest podcast ever. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, Brandon, do you think it spurs economic growth and creating more jobs? Because that is what you'll hear from some folks that on the other side.
Well, there's the two things. Spurring economic growth and creating jobs are two different things. Would it spur economic? I'll tell you who it would spur economic growth for. If you were making $12 or $13 an hour and you're on the margin and an employer looks at you and goes, he's really not worth $15 an hour, but in order for me not to retrain somebody to hire someone else, I'll go ahead and give him a $3 an hour raise. Now, I'm probably going to expect more out of him. I'm going to give him more duties. I'm going to try to get more value out of that individual because now, 3 over 15, I'm paying 20% more. And so for that individual who kind of got an accelerated increase in pay without merit, yeah, that is economic growth for that individual. But there are other people where it's not economic growth because it's situational, right? So the $10 employee, it's really, they call it a minimum wage, but it's almost like, another way to think about it is it makes it illegal for you to sell something for less than a certain price. So if you're a $10 employee, it'd be just like if you had a $10,000 car. And if Joe Biden came along and said, oh, no, you can never sell that car for less than $15,000. Guess what your car's going to do? It is never going to sell. And so for everyone who is young and getting into the labor market, for everyone who may be developmentally disadvantaged or disabled, who works in a program, I've got one of my journalists works in an organization that places developmentally disadvantaged adults into employment opportunities. Those opportunities are going away because people were doing it as almost like a social service previously to give people a sense of self-worth and to give back to the community. But when you increase, the participation in a program like that by 50%, for all those individuals below that level, it does not spur economic growth. It completely eliminates it. And then there are other people, as Mr. Buchanan mentioned, that are on the purchasing side, past the labor with consumable goods and services. And so if you're remarkably affluent or rather affluent or even upper middle class, watching your hamburger go up by $2 or watching your car wash go up by $3 or $4 probably will not kill you. Although over the course of a year, it may take 5-7% out of your purchasing power as a family. But if you're on a fixed income and you get $600, $700 a week and you're living on the margins and all of a sudden everything has an inflated cost of 6, 7, 8, 10%, for those individuals, there is no economic growth. There's economic hardship. And so to me, it's insulting to think that someone can go out and point at something and wave a magic wand and say, this is no longer worth $10, it's worth 15. When in reality, something's worth what it's worth. And it ends up basically being a situation where we pick winners and losers on one side or the other of the economic spectrum. And it's really just a bunch of pandering to a base. And in many ways, I think it's miscalculated. The problem is, I think by the time people suffer from it, a lot of folks won't know what the suffering came from, and it will be from this.
In this article, I'll give you a good stat on the con side to kind of to echo your sentiments. And this study was done, I think in 2014, 2015. I can't remember. I'm trying to read it as I go. San Francisco's Office of Economic Analysis said that an increase to $15 would reduce the city's employment by 15,270 private sector jobs. So, in other words, and those are estimates, give or take, but in other words, you can raise the minimum wage and exactly what you both are saying. Employers kind of go, Well, what I can charge for a product has got a range, right? My cost of doing business is going to fluctuate in an estimate. It's never, more than likely, never going to go down if I try to grow. Because when you grow a business, the cost of doing business usually goes up a little bit too. So there's all these variables that go into it. And if all of a sudden the government comes in and artificially says, by the way, here's a drastic cost of doing business, I've got to go find a way that's not mandated to cut payroll, to cut cost. So now I've got to go to all the things I can control and go, okay, maybe I don't offer this product anymore. Maybe I have to let go of these two. Maybe Brandon goes to part-time. Brandon, you and Eric were both full-time. You both now are going to get 10 hours less. Enjoy your $15 an hour, but you're going to make about the same because I'm going to use you both to make one person now, you know.
And by the way, you better make as many widgets as you were before, or else you don't have a job at all.
That's it.
Exactly.
That's it. And the other thing I wanted to bring up, and it'll come up in a minute, but I think people forget this. The minimum wage was never designed to be a livable wage, really. It was designed to get people to have a set standard of living, minimum standard of living. It doesn't mean you should want to live in the minimum. The other thing is, and we're going to get into this in the pros and cons, who it affects, because it affects people entry-level jobs. Here's the second pro. Increasing the minimum wage would reduce poverty. I'll just read a couple of quick things. A person working full-time at the federal minimum wage of $7.25 per hour earns $15,080 in a year, which is 20% higher than the 2015 federal poverty level of $12,331 for one person household under 65. But 8% below the 2015 level of poverty. So in other words, they've raised the level of poverty. They're saying when you increase the minimum wage, you lift people above the current level of defined poverty. Ladies and gentlemen, do you guys or sirs, do y'all have some feedback on that one? It would reduce poverty.
Brandon, you or me on this one? You want
to
go first?
I'll lead since you led last time. So, yes. If Snopes was fact checking that, it would say partly accurate, right? And so partly accurate. If you are making 12 or 13 and you're on that cusp where you get a little extra money because the employer will not let you go for that small sliver of the population, yes. But when it makes you unemployable to get into the workforce, what I feel that this is more likely to do is to throw a whole lot of people on government subsistence. And while I do not think that every one of my liberal or leftist counterparts has bad intentions for the public at large. Many of them have to understand that that's what it's going to do. And in a way, that's good for them. If you live off the government, if you get thrown onto the dole, and you'll stay there after a while. And this is, this is like the conservatism where, liberals don't have a brain and conservatives don't have a heart. And so, but I grew up in this situation where everyone around me was on some sort of what we call the Alabama lottery, which is disability, or they got stuck in some kind of welfare cycle, multi-generational, and it inoculates people from success when they get on it without cause. And, my father, as he got much, much older, he had clubfoot, facial deformities, heart conditions. He was just born with lots of congenital defects, and his body broke down very early. And he used some of those services toward the end of his life. But I've got able-bodied cousins that would easily, at their rates, get thrown onto this, and some of them did, and they never recovered from it. And it does something psychological and culturally to you. So yes, and would it be economically beneficial for a very small handful of people? I think absolutely. But for the rest, I don't think it would. And the last comment I will make is, if you ever want to see what a fixed minimum wage does to jobs, go to LaGuardia Airport. Go to an airport in New York City. Try to find a waiter or a waitress. Try to find one. Good luck. I walked the entire terminal because I did not want to punch my order into a screen. I wanted to sit down in a formal restaurant and be served and have a pleasant experience. You can't do that in the entire airport system there, because that flat minimum wage that they have set completely eliminated all those jobs, and they were replaced with iPads and a couple of cooks. And that's where we're going in many sectors, not all. You can't do that in some automotive sectors, but it's going to push forward automation, and that's going to reduce employment.
Eric, anything you want to add about that before we address some of these comments that people are making?
I'd like to keep it very simple and say I think it's going to increase poverty. And the way it's going to increase poverty is it's going to keep a lot of people in the poverty cycle, that people are not going to be able to get jobs. If they don't already have a job, they're going to have a harder time getting an entry-level job when the minimum wage has been raised to $15 an hour. One of my favorite economists also happens to be an African-American who talks a lot about what is most beneficial for the African-American community, which also happens to be pretty darn beneficial for the rest of our society. And there's a guy named Shelby Steele, and he talks about that the way that the best chance that someone has to be successful and have a good job someday is one of two ways. Stay in school and get a good education so that when you start going into the labor market, you're getting a job that's way above minimum wage. But if you don't have the opportunity to stay in school, what's the best opportunity for most people who are from the communities that don't have access to college? And the answer is finding entry-level jobs, learning the skills of those jobs, learning the work ethic, learning how to behave in a job site, how to work hard, and how to be promoted. And one of the most important opportunities for young people is coming along as a teenager is getting that first job and learning what it's like to work.
Amen.
And if you're going to take you, and what a minimum wage does is it tells high school students that you're not allowed to go work for less than what we're wanting full-grown adults to be able to live off of. So we've made it illegal for high school kids to go work for $10, $11, $12 an hour at the ice cream store, or the pizza parlor, or the gas station, or wherever it is they can find an entry-level job where they can learn, like I did working at Mountain Pizza in 1983, that you got to show up to work on time, that you got to dress appropriately for work, that you got to be respectful of your boss, that you got to take care of the customers, and you've got to think ahead to make sure your schedule is going to work out so you're not missing work or doing something stupid. On all those basic working skills, we as a society don't need to be paying $15 an hour or whatever the minimum wage is so that high school kids can learn those skills. But if you want to purposefully ensure that high school kids don't have a chance to go out and learn those basic skills, then set a minimum wage that's somehow supposed to support adults with families, and then tell high school kids they're not allowed to undercut that by offering their services to learn how to work. And guess who it affects the most, according to Shelby Steele? African Americans and other minorities who don't have the same access. It's what made his generation, he said, that's more successful than later generations, because they could go to work and at 10 cents an hour, 15 cents an hour, whatever it was, go learn those basic job skills when you're 15, 16, 17 years old. And then later on, you're ready when you get a real job that's supposed to support an adult. And who doesn't learn those things? People who never get a chance to work in their teenage years or early 20s.
Let me jump in here real quick because we're going to make some comments. I mean, we got some comments, but I want to throw this out there now because I was going to say it at the end, but you hit on a top. Both of you have hit on this topic. I don't think it's, sometimes the Republicans, when it comes to certain topics, and the Democrats, when it comes to other topics, look like they're harsh, cold-hearted, unkind. They don't care. You don't care. Yeah, you just don't care. We're a moral high ground if we want something that you don't want. When in reality, I think how we look at what kind is and what helpful is, that definition matters, because I think there's two ways to look at it. Yeah, I can give you more now. That helps right now, and it has a bad effect. Or we could put something in place that helps you learn and actually helps you learn the habits you'll need to be more successful without the government involvement. That's helping you. It just may not be helping you as much in this exact moment, but that's still helping. And I wrote this down. When you're 40 and you're at a job, more than likely the employer is giving you money in return of good effort, good work, and productivity. Perfect. Exchange of value. When I'm 16 or 17, I really don't have anything except learning the basic habits. So one of the reasons I get paid less is because I'm actually extracting more than just money from that job, right? The value that I get as a 17-year-old when I was showing up to Red Food Store with my stupid red bow tie was the fact of, we're teaching you some stuff that's going to help you when you're 35 and 40. So we're going to pay you less now because we're going to take a little more from you, and you're going to take some non-tangibles from us. And I think that's important to understand, that Republicans aren't cold-hearted. We actually want to help people. We just want to help them get on their own feet without the help of government. Did I state that correct before we start addressing these comments?
Can I just address that very quickly, Clint?
No.
I've got an analogy. Yes, thanks. An analogy that goes back to what we just said a second ago with the conservatives are mean and liberals are stupid, and where do you come up with the best policies and how do you discuss this stuff? I know a lot of people who are liberal, lean left, Democrats, and almost all the people I know that are regular people have great hearts, and they want to help people, and it's about goodwill, desiring to do what's best. But they may not always understand, or at least be willing to even learn or have or never have had the opportunity to have these conversations before. And here's my simple analogy. At the end of World War II, when the U.S. soldiers started rescuing some of their fellow Americans who had been POWs, by the end of the war, the Germans hadn't been able to feed the POWs, and those guys were starving. And those guys had been on starvation rations and had horribly shut down systems that were where their bodies were just not ready for real food. And then what's the first thing you want to do if you're one of those soldiers who gets to a POW camp and there's an American who looks like he weighs 75 pounds and he's 6'1"? You want to whip out your C rations and give him that spaghetti. You want to give him a candy bar. You want to, one of the most important things you're supposed to do when you find somebody who's recently recovered from starvation after being a prisoner is to slowly reintroduce food. Start with broth, start with a little bit of water, start with whatever liquids you can get into until their body can start absorbing nutrients again. And the point is this simple. The instinct we have to help people might lead us to the worst way of treating them or helping them. So when you're making your decision on how to help people on instinct, I'm going to give that guy, that fellow American, I want to give him a candy bar, and you end up killing him because you overloaded his system that wasn't ready for real food. Or I'm going to give him a big hunk of meat from one of my C ration cans. Your instincts are right, but your method is wrong, and you're going to kill somebody. And I think that's one way that I would describe the difference between a lot of conservatives and liberals these days. Is a lot of liberals, oh, I really want to help somebody. And it's just not fair. They don't get paid $15 an hour, because how could anybody live off of that without asking the questions? Well, stop and think for a second. Do you really want to tell all those kids in high school that they're not allowed to go out and get a job and sell their labor and their time for something less than $15 an hour, that they have to compete against adults who are willing to work for $15 an hour? Think about how you're hurting people and making things worse.
Brandon, you want to add to it before we start going over some comments?
I think Eric's right. I mean, the lady who has a 40-year-old grandson or kid living in her basement probably really thinks that's good for him. Probably really does. I mean, when somebody, you could push an able-bodied person in a wheelchair long enough to where they can't use their legs. Perfectly good legs. You get people used to certain things, and you're trying to help them, and often you think you're giving them a hand up, and you're not. You're really inoculating them against success. And I don't know what, I think, and going back to Eric's point, those initial jobs that you get, your first 4 or 5 jobs, and I think the earlier you can get a kid working and learning the value of money and the responsibility and the cadence, and that everything in the world is not going to be exactly how you want it to be, that is such a good, valuable skill. I started blowing in insulation, I think, when I was 11 or 12 for Charlie and his rental properties. My scoutmaster I'm sure I was more to keep up with than I was helpful. But I was super poor, and he probably thought this would be a good way to give this kid some money. And then later I got a job at a vet's office, and I used to bus tables at Valmonte's Steakhouse and Lounge till 11 or 12 in the morning when I was 13 or 14. And it taught me how to work. And if I had not had those opportunities growing up as somebody that lived way below the poverty line, how would I have learned how to work and to achieve and to want to do better and to see people in action that had jobs? Because a lot of, at the end of my life, my father was disabled. He was much older than your typical parent, and I would not have had an opportunity to see work in action had I not had entry-level opportunities. And so to think that those could go away or be remarkably diminished is horrible, in my opinion.
I'm going to throw a stat out, and then I'm going to read some comments. And one thing I don't think people understand, if you're not in the business world, which is okay, and I'm on the fringe of it. I'm not as deep in it as you both are, but 89% of businesses, of all defined small businesses, a defined small business, according to the Chamber of Commerce, United States, and labor force is 500 employees or less, I think. And 89% of all businesses in the United States have 20 employees or less. So when people say just take less and give us more, you're talking to your neighbor who owns XYZ widget factory down the road, but they only got 9 employees or 12 employees. And when you want them to take less, it's not the Walmarts and the Targets and the Googles. They can all afford this. They're not going to care one bit. It's your neighbor that you're asking to take less, and you don't know how much they're living on now. I had a conversation with a buddy of mine that makes $120,000 a year. Now, he doesn't own his own business, but insurance costs, he started breaking it down for me. He goes, man, do you realize that I actually had more disposable income and was doing better when I was making 70 grand a year with, fewer. And the reason I bring that up is what things look like aren't always what they really are until you know. So let's go through this. Some quick questions. Tim Jolly said, by raising minimum wage, the cost of everything will increase substantially. That is true. And then Ken Meyer, thank you, Ken, for jumping on. A minimum wage increase, ironically, hits hardest against those who need the help most. This is what we were talking about, the young unemployed. Most minority men will not have opportunities to enter the workforce and learn the important soft and hard skills and work their way up. And that's what we were kind of talking about. And I appreciate Ken and them jumping on. Go ahead.
You said something at the beginning of the podcast, and I think that it is relevant here. You said that when somebody first starts out in an employment situation, they don't have a lot of skills, that they are taking value from the business as they are getting value from the business. They have to be trained. An employer tolerates a lot more from a young, unskilled person than they do an older individual. I'll throw this out there as an example. We have a nanny that works for us, who's like part of our family. She's very young, very sweet, and she's learning how to work, really like her first real job. And she's working in the COVID ward as a medical assistant and working her way up through nursing school. And she's picking up a ton of skills, and it is a life-changing experience for her. And often when I talk to people, I'm involved in my fraternity from college. And I explained to them, it's better to take your first few jobs for experience rather than pay. If you can learn something from someone and you can leverage those relationships and leverage that skill set to make yourself a better person, I don't care if you have to work for free. And sometimes it would be cheaper for you to go work for free for 4 or 5 years than to invest in college if you know what you want to do. And you'd learn a lot more skills and you'd have no debt. And eventually, if you do that for a couple of months, the employer will feel uber guilty and they will just pay you. And I remember reading Titan, which is Rockefeller's autobiography. And he said, when I was without work, I made finding work my full-time work. And this is in the first panic before the Great Depression. And he walked the streets for about 2 months. And this is, you want to talk about what happens when jobs are scarce and when the government creates a scarcity situation in employment. And he got a job as a grocery clerk, and he worked, I think it was like almost a month for free, and slept on a cot in the grocers. And that's all he could do. It was like an unpaid internship. And then after a while, they gave him some work. He saved up some money. He bought some things and sold some things. And all those entry-level opportunities are so important for people. And to extinguish a lot of those through some kind of arbitrary price fixing just seems unconscionable.
If you're wanting, in my opinion, a really classic example of when the government gets involved with air quote moral or good intentions, which we can argue about every law ever created on that point. But when Obamacare kicked in, I know a lot of business owners that had to redefine what a full-time employee was. A lot of people lost insurance. I posted a thing about, did your insurance go up under Obamacare? And I had dozens and dozens of comments, and the vast majority, 80%, yeah. It affected. A lot of people just paid the penalty and just lived without insurance at different ages. And so the reason I bring that up is when the government gets in trying to help people, this is what I never understood. On the other side of that are people that it's hurting. And I don't understand why when we have these conversations, if I'm unkind because I don't want to do your thing. How come you're not unkind if you don't care about the other anecdotal stories on the other side of the argument? The dad or the mom that goes from 40 to 45 hours a week to 30 to 32 hours a week, and they actually have to go get 2 jobs now, and they have less time with their family. How come that doesn't make you unkind? And I think it's how we learn to talk about this that really matters. The next point, unless somebody's got something to say, I'm going to go to the next pro and con. I'm going to state the pro, and I'm going to give you guys a chance, but I'm going to read a stat about the con first after I do this. A higher minimum wage would reduce government welfare spending. I personally think that when you tell somebody they've got to get a $3 an hour increase, I still think that's kind of a backdoor way of doing welfare. But the con is a minimum wage would hurt businesses and force companies to close. 60% of small business owners, 60%, say that raising minimum wage will not only hurt small businesses, but put a lot of them closer to going out of business. And what does that do? It puts more people on the welfare system, on unemployment, on the subsidies, which is what you guys were talking about earlier. I'm going to go through these pros and cons. You guys put a finger up if you want to stop and say something. Would that be okay?
Let's start with this one, Clint, because I think there's an important point there. 60% of small businesses are saying it's going to affect them. Let me add one historical point that I think is, let's put this in context a little bit. So the minimum wage has really been around in concept since the 1800s, in the United States since the 1930s. And the point in time in history where the minimum wage was the highest in terms of, you can measure it in purchasing value of what a dollar would purchase or what a dollar cost an employer to earn, was in 1968 when the minimum wage was $1.60. Well, in 2019, which is the most recent statistics I was able to find, that would be $11.53 an hour. So minimum wage right now is well below that. But at one time, we were asking employers to come up with the equivalent of $11.50 an hour as a minimum wage. So we're talking now about $15 an hour. This would be dramatically new territory in terms of the increase of what we're expecting people to pay in a minimum wage. It's way above whatever in American history we've expected concerning the purchase power of a dollar or what it costs an employer to pay somebody. So we're going to create this giant magical experiment of how much can employers handle in terms of having to pay people in relation to the value of a dollar that we've never done before. And we're doing it at a time of a pandemic where we've already shut down small businesses for periods of time. We're forcing them to operate on 50% or 75% or 25% capacity with all these other rules in place. And now all of a sudden we're talking about doing a $15 minimum wage, which, like I said, would be dramatically higher than we've ever done in our country before. And then we're also not paying any attention to the difference in the cost of living in different parts of the country. So if you're in New York City or Seattle or Washington, D.C., and you want to tell people you have to pay $15 an hour, it might not make that big a difference because we're already having to pay them enough. If you're going to find somebody to come work in your restaurant in downtown Washington, D.C., you're probably having to pay them $15 an hour because of the cost of living in that area, New York City as well. In Murfreesboro, Tennessee, it doesn't cost that much to live. You can live on a lot less. If you're in Sequatchie County, you don't need $15 an hour to have a reasonably nice apartment or house to live in, or you don't need at least as much money. And if you have people who are earning, one person in the family earning $20 an hour and the other person earning $10 an hour, that money goes a lot farther in rural Tennessee and Alabama and Mississippi and Idaho than it does in downtown Seattle, Washington, D.C., New York, and San Francisco. So a minimum wage in New York, is it really going to help that many people? Maybe a little, but barely. Is it going to create huge problems in the rest of the United States where the cost of living was lower and now all of a sudden everybody's got to get paid $15 an hour? It's almost like, let's destroy jobs and flyover country law.
Exactly.
All at the same time we're passing the let's not give minorities and poor people job skills law.
Brandon?
He's absolutely right. And I'm glad you brought that point up because I've mentioned that to people before. I mean, it's just not the same as you referenced at the beginning of the program, having your law practice. It's the same thing with me. All my business is nationwide or across country borders. And I love having the tax burden and the cost of living in Chattanooga, Tennessee, working with people in California, working with people in the Northeast, where things are a lot more expensive. And let me just give you an idea about the practical application of this, because I work with hundreds of small businesses that do pay people below $15 an hour as an entry level tradesman in the painting industry. So if tomorrow there was like a magic wand wave and they have to start paying people below 15, as I mentioned before, you're going to look at your payroll, you're going to find everybody that's below there, and you're going to have to start evaluating whether or not you keep those individuals. Now, in a trade such as painting or construction or installing floors or maybe even auto mechanics, where you don't really know when you walk in the door what the price is going to be. Somebody comes to quote your house to paint it, you've got an idea, but you don't really know what it's going to be because it's a transaction that is customized and it is infrequent. So it might be 3,000, you think it might be 5,000, you really don't know. So if they have to raise their prices by 10 or 15%, the consumer probably will not know it, will not feel it, will probably pay it, and it's not going to be that big a deal. But here's where it is a big issue. I have a friend that owns multiple Zaxby's locations, one of my best friends, college fraternity brother. And people do know what chicken fingers and a Coke costs. People do know what a hamburger costs. People do know what a car wash costs. People do know what certain things cost because they buy those items and they have those same recurring transactions on a weekly or monthly basis. What happens when you raise that minimum wage and all of a sudden a large percentage of that owner's income goes away? They are reluctant to raise prices because they are fearful. And they may raise prices too late. The market may adjust too late, and it puts that owner in a precarious situation where if they're already on the verge of going out of business, it just hastens it. And after we've gone through all what we have needlessly put small business owners through over the last 12 months, to again give them unpredictability and uncertainty. If you want an economy to recover, which is what we need in this country right now, you don't start throwing a bunch of BS at small business to contend with, because uncertainty creates all kinds of reductions in expenditures and planning and purchasing and capital and equipment and launching new services and investing. And the Biden administration, coming on the heels of everything that we have done, throwing this out in the market is just going to be very, very harmful. I mean, even the mention of it is harmful.
I think one of the things that people don't understand too, there's a lot of businesses out there that have just opened up or within 6 months, 2 years, 3 years. New businesses are still new after 2 or 3 years. It's not like they're established completely. And a lot of those businesses that would traditionally be able to push through and make it, because there's learning curves and there's adjustments. If you put something like this on them, it might take a business that could have made it and force somebody to actually go out of business artificially. It's not something that they could not have pushed through. I need to read some of these comments though before we get too far down the road. Real quick, Ken Meyer. Yeah, I'm going to just agree with this one. We had already talked about that, but you're correct. You're correct. Amazon's, Walmart's, they can absorb the higher minimum wage. Smaller businesses can't. Eric and Brandon, look at this one real quick. You should also discuss the opposite of minimum wage controls. During World War II, wage and price controls were put in place. What was the impact? Employers unable to pay higher wages creatively began to offer other non-wage benefits to attract.
There you go.
Let me go ahead and where am I at? Creatively begin to attract quality employees. This resulted in employer-paid health care, for example, which then began to skew the healthcare delivery market in the U.S. by creating a third-party payer system for healthcare. Again, it's kind of a backdoor way of the government taking care of you when these things become expected and required. But does anybody want to address the wage controls and price controls?
Well, let me chime in on this because it actually relates to what I do for a living when I'm not talking with you on these shows, is helping people get their insurance benefits and getting paid. And a lot of my clients have their insurance through work, whether it's long-term disability, life insurance, or health insurance. And Ken's exactly right that historically in the United States, those things began being tied to work when in World War II, the government put wage controls and said you can't pay more than $15 an hour to somebody. So in order to get the good workers to come work in your factory making machine guns for the airplanes, you had to go offer this extra health insurance. We've created this whole system now in America, starting with World War II through now, for 80 years of somehow employers are responsible for your insurance, life insurance, health insurance, sometimes even, long-term disability and those other insurance programs. It's an extra cost that's on employers. And the more you raise the minimum wage, the more you're going to raise. That's part of what's buried in those other costs. It also creates a situation where employees just don't know the cost of their health insurance. So it's not a real competitive marketplace. And then we could have a whole nother show, Clint. We're not going to do it today because you've already heard me. But ERISA, the federal law that covers those employee benefits, has totally tangled up that marketplace and basically made it so insurance companies can do whatever the heck they want to do to deny claims and get away with murder. And it's just a whole bungled up federal system where regulations haven't worked, haven't fixed anything, and made the problem worse for everybody. So we can have that conversation later on about what all that amounts to. But when the government starts to control wages to pretend like market forces don't work, don't tell me that the conservatives are the people that are anti-science. Liberals are the ones, Democrats are the ones that are anti-science because they don't believe in economics, and they mess everything up.
Well, and real quick, we talked about this. When you say anti-science, are you mean that you roll out your experts and I roll out mine, and yours are right because they agree with you, mine are right because they agree with me? Matthew Durham brought up the great quote about the death of experts. There's a book about that, I think he said, which I would love to have a conversation about that one day, because now we don't even know who to trust when it comes to experts. Brandon, what do you want to say real quick about this, the Ken Meyer comment, if you want to?
Well, anytime you put arbitrary pressure on the market, business owners immediately get in a room and they begin to contrive with one another and their employees how to get around it. That's the whole thing. But half a damn business is figuring out how to make a living despite, not because, of the government trying to help you or other people. In spite of them. And I always tell our guys, hey, we don't know what's happening in 2021, but you better start preparing to out earn what those bastards are going to do to you. You got to get ready to out earn them, because they're going to do it to you. They're going to screw you. It's just like, they're going to buy you dinner first. And so in this case, they ain't buying you dinner. They're just going to screw you. And so you got to start preparing for it. And so when you see these things in markets like ours, what happens is when people can't get entry-level jobs for $15 an hour, if they do want to work, and if they are not, if the subsidies, if them getting on unemployment or some of the long-term benefit does not rob them of their ambition, and for some people it will for a lifetime at that early age, then you're going to pay them under the table, and you're going to pay them cash, and you're going to give them stuff, and you're going to do whatever you can to bring those entry-level people in that you need. Will it happen in corporate America? No, but it'll happen in the trades. It'll happen in restaurants, and it'll happen in a lot of situations where people will not have any employment protections because they just want to gain access to the employment market with their labor, and they'll put themselves in uncomfortable situations where they aren't paying into the system and where wages aren't taxed. And so there's all kinds of, it's the same situation that happens with illegal immigration. And why and how those people get mistreated, because if they come in over here illegally, there are no legal protections for them. They're afraid of getting caught, and they put themselves in employment situations where they have to work for less than what they're worth. And now we're throwing citizens into that same category, and it's going to have a lot of negative ramifications we haven't thought about yet.
So, I know we addressed it a little bit, but I wanted to go back and ask a quick question, and then I'm going to ask you a question about what comes out of a dollar as a business owner that I don't think people really understand. We'll go through a little list of things that you have to take out of a dollar when you get it paid from one of your clients, because I don't think people who say just take less, Eric and Brandon and dear insert Mrs. or Mr. Business Owner here. But here's my question: when we glossed over it, the cost of living's gone up. Inflation, Eric, I know you wanted to bring up inflation at some point. Inflation's going to go up. Everything's getting more expensive. I'm a single mom, or I'm a dad, or I'm a family, and I work X number of hours a week, and I'm making $12 an hour, $13 an hour. I can't find a job that pays much more or much less. I don't know. I'm not going to identify their skill set. My question to you is, what do you say to that person? Because they're out there. I saw them post on my thing. I cannot live on what I'm getting paid currently. The $15 an hour would help me. They don't understand the ramifications. What do you say to that person?
One quick answer is that if those are people all making $12 an hour, so they're going to get a $3 an hour raise, that means 4 of them are going to get a raise and 1 of them is going to get fired. So it's going to help 4 of them, but the 5th one's not going to have a job anymore, because employers can't magically come up with more money. We outlawed money trees in the basement, I think, back in the 1930s. Employers just don't have those anymore. We're not allowed to have those. Those were confiscated by FDR. I'm saying it's that facetiously, because that's almost like that's how the left thinks about economics, is that it's magic money. And if you're an employer, you've got all the money in the world and you can handle all these regulations, rules, minimum wages, and everything else that's designed to basically drive businesses out of business. If we were to design a system to ensure people didn't open small businesses unless they were really driven to do so, we couldn't do a better job right now in America. We are making more regulations and more rules designed to stop small businesses from happening than ever before.
Brandon, I know you got to jump off soon. Do you have a minute or two?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'll hang on till we wrap up.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to go over this real quick. And Eric, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I know Brandon's on a tight schedule. And Brandon, if you need to step off, me and Eric can do what we did last time and wrap stuff up.
And talk bad about you.
Absolutely. What are we talking about? So I put $1 out there, and I know there's not an official checklist, and some of these will vary due to different businesses have different fees and stuff. But when somebody looks at a business owner and they go, you made, $500,000 last year. Your company sold, you got $500,000, $1 million business last year. For $1 that you pull in, let's just go through a few things that come out of that dollar to the business owner, because I don't think people have that long checklist in front of them. Brandon, start.
I just got through doing an annual conference where some people call it a super spreader event. I like to call it a herd immunity event. But at any rate, we just had a big conference where people came together in person. And I can tell you, we had groups that were small. We had 4 different groups, the way we broke them up. And some people were 400,000 and below. Some people were 7 to 8. Our largest group was 2.3 million and up. And I'm here to tell you that a lot of those people have lots of top line revenue, but very low incomes. And that's often because of business mismanagement. And I help people do that. But even a healthy business a business that is ran poorly, in my opinion, in our sector and trades, probably has a cash flow to owner number of about 20%. So if you run $1 million through a business, 200,000 of that's going to come out on the other end of for the owner. A third of that's going to go to the federal government. Another quarter is going to go to state and local taxes, and they're probably left with, when everything comes out of the wash, they're probably left with about $100,000 of money that they can then spend on housing and education and whatever else they've got to do for their family, and hopefully save enough to invest and do whatever. And I would say of that dollar that came into the business, probably a quarter to a third of it gets eaten up in taxes. At the end, the end money goes out. Maybe the owner gets to keep 10% of it. And then in our case, about 40 to 50% of it is going to go to labor. And then about 15% will go to materials, which is the store. And then then the rest of it's eaten up by insurance and administrative expenses.
Well, that's what I wanted real quick, Brandon, because that's the thing people understand this. The fees, the permits, the consistent training, the codes, the $100 here, $50 here, $250 here, $1,000 licensing here. People don't understand that I think it's just another way to tax a business owner. It is. But a lot of people that go to work for these businesses don't understand that when they make a widget that sells for $10, there are not only your healthcare, Mr. Employee, but your neighbors, the person standing next to you in line. Out of that dollar comes insurance cost. The cost of doing business goes up. Clay Dennis was on the phone with me, and I know he wanted to try to jump on here, but he was busy. And he brought up that it's the payroll taxes. He goes, if the government wants to help somebody, he goes, let's talk about payroll taxes above a certain level or below a certain level. Let the government eat those costs. I'll take that money and pay it more to my employee. I got to pay the money anyway. I'd rather give it to my employee and give them a raise so I don't give it to the government. Anyway, it was a cool idea, but what you just said, I don't think a lot of people know the cost of doing business. Eric, do you want to chime in on that?
I wish you'd asked me this ahead of time, Clint. I think this would be good for future topics, because I actually have a spreadsheet at my work, because I work with a company that helps law firms run their businesses better the way that Brandon does it for the businesses in his industry. It's a company called Atticus, and one of the things they helped us do was put all our expenses on a spreadsheet, and then break them down by category. So what we shoot for is 40 to 50% of every dollar that comes in the door. That we don't spend more than about 50% of that on personnel, on people. But it's not just their wages. It's the insurance. It's the cost of going to conferences. It's the licensing fees. It's the continuing education fees. It's the workers' comp insurance, not just health insurance. So the coverage type insurance. It's the malpractice insurance. All that added up, we try to keep that under 50% of our total income. So that's out the door just for the people. And then there's the overhead cost of our IT, call that 6 to 7%. There's the overhead cost of our having a building or paying to have the opportunity for people to work from home in the new economy. But either way, that can still be expensive. And for us still having 2 downtown buildings, we try very hard to keep it under 10% of our revenue. Then there's the cost of advertising and marketing, another 10%. And in case for those of you doing math in your head at home, we're up to 70 or 80% before the owner gets to keep anything, if we're keeping everything to those categories and having a decent income year.
And you've not been taxed yet.
And we haven't been taxed yet. This is before you take your taxes out. And I'll be frank with you guys, in 2020, we didn't do that well because we still had the same expenses. We didn't let anybody go. But our income was down some. And so we were down to 10% of that, maybe. And then we got to pay taxes on that 10%. And so the goal is, in a good year, you want to do 20 or 30, maybe, but do you really do that all the time? Maybe sometimes you do 5%. So it's not like when you hear a company making $1 million, they don't make $1 million. They pay $500,000 to other people to have a job, and maybe more. And then pay a lot of other stuff into the economy, and the business gets to keep very, very little. And if you increase the overhead related to people by 10 or 15% by increasing the minimum wage for some companies that have a lot of low income workers, you've just destroyed that profit margin. And the question is, why the heck stay in business?
I think we also lost it. And Brandon, you might address it. There's nothing wrong. It's almost like people have this thing of business owners, well, you're trying to make more. Well, of course I'm trying to make more. That's why I took the risk of starting the business, so I can lose everything or I can make more for my family. And I don't think people understand that. Of course I'm trying to make more. But the other thing is, when did we in our world go from, it's supposed to be an entry level, and this might be a good place to give you the platforms as we wrap things up. This is supposed to be an entry level, which we've covered, position. It's supposed to be something, even if it's between jobs or you need a second job to help or supplement, set a minimum standard, to now I have to live on this. This is my living wage now. That's what I have to do. I don't think it's always been that way.
I think a lot of this goes back to the culture that we're in. In World War II and during the Great Depression, people would almost starve rather than get subsistence when they truly, genuinely needed it to just feed and clothe their family. And I'm not talking about HVAC, smartphones, a car for every grown person in the house, TV, internet, 3 cell phones, 4 iPads. I'm not talking about that kind of poverty. I'm talking about dirt floors, need some hardtack and some coffee and some lard and some beans to feed the kids and make sure that in the winter they got 1 pair of shoes to walk around. That's how my father grew up. I grew up extremely poor, not that bad, but I mean, it was rough. And
Can I just throw in one more thing? My dad told me the story that if they didn't get the Sears Roebuck catalog, they've run out of toilet paper.
it. And Dad had an outhouse, and we grew up. We had 1 sink in the kitchen. We had red well water. Had to run for like 3 minutes before you could drink it. No air conditioning, and no carpet on the floor.
In Alabama,
and unpainted wafer board ceilings, and the house had burned down damn near it. And Dad had just slapped some paint on it, and that's where we lived. And but there was a time when men and women thought self-esteem came from doing esteemable things. And now they think it can be mailed to them from someone else. And in the talk of hard work and bringing yourself up, and the American dream has been demonized by the left as if it is something evil and unachievable. And so people don't strive for it anymore. People don't, it has become noble to become a ward of the state, and noble to become a ward of the state, and evil to provide employment for other people. And when culturally you get to that point, you get nonsense like this that's being proposed because the values of the culture have changed.
Eric, when did the little switch, or do you think there's been a switch? Maybe
I think what Brandon just said is absolutely spot on, that we culturally done that. I don't think it's universal clearly at this point. There's still plenty of people who recognize that the history of hard work and success in America to achieve the American dream is what we want to maintain, and equality of opportunity is what we should strive for, and that as many people should have it as possible. And the problem is we are creating a culture where we're telling people you can't succeed. The system's not fair. It's out to get you. And that if you vote for us, we'll try to get you a way around the system by increasing the minimum wage or passing other laws that will take care of those mean, evil employers that aren't taking care of you. The problem is that's not how it really works. The way it really works is the best way to get a job is to have an active economy that has plenty of employers that are looking to hire people. And the way to do that is through less regulation. But that doesn't get certain people elected. If they're not telling this bad narrative about how bad the economy is, or how bad the way people are going to treat you is, how unfair it is, how you don't have a chance, well, that's what gets them elected, is telling those lies.
Well, and two, I think we've gotten in a habit now of pointing to anecdotal stories, which I'm not saying aren't real and they don't deserve to be heard, and we shouldn't try as a society try to figure out how to fill in the gaps. But we point at things and say the government needs to find an answer for all things bad, all things. So for the parent or the family out there who truly we've not answered, we've not solved their problem. I've got two parents and we're both making $12 an hour and we still can't make ends meet. And maybe, as a society, we haven't learned how to save our money. We spend well above we don't live within our means. We most Americans don't save like our grandparents used to. And we don't address that. Right. And we're not, but the problem with it is when we look to the government to fix all of the evil, either evil or the things that fall through the cracks, it's going to create cracks and evil in other places that we just ignore, like you said, Eric and Brandon, to get elected. So I'm going to give you guys both the final say and make sure that you both have covered everything you want to cover, or bring up a topic before we wrap it up. Brandon, why don't you go first, because Eric was about to talk. I like cutting him off.
This is what I'll say in closing, because like I said, it's like tax season for old Brandon. I apologize for being hard to get a hold of in the winter months, but man, it comes summer and springtime, I've been good to go. But a lot of these problems, and who wants to hear this, with people that don't get ahead is because they don't want to do the things that get you ahead. And we've not taught that as a culture, that getting ahead requires certain things. A lot of people want to be in shape or have better health, but they just, for whatever reason, aren't going to put in the work and either lifestyle or diet to do it. And so you have consequences for that. For example, and if you're making $12 an hour and you want to be making 15, pick up a skill, do something extra. Ask the boss, is there anything you can do to earn extra money? Read a book, take a night course, pick up a second job, be willing to move and take some risk, save more, spend less. I mean, my wife and I lived in the same house. It's a small house in Brainerd for 14 years. We paid it off. We drive 8-year-old cars. I live my business is housed in a rough building off of Rossville Boulevard because I'm very utilitarian, and it's paid for, and I rent it out, and I've saved up enough money to build my next house. Did everybody else move into nicer houses before I did? Yeah, everybody. But I sleep at night knowing that I don't have to worry about any of that stuff. And if the economy hits the crapper, well, at least everything's paid for. And those types of hard decisions that do not reward you in the moment are very difficult and challenging to make. And most people do not want to make them. But teaching people that is a good way to get ahead and the safest way to get ahead, and that your life is in your own hands and no one else's, is what really breeds success. It's what you would tell somebody across the kitchen table if you were trying to help them. And when national policy does not align with what you would do in your own relationships or your own family or your own neighborhood, when those are not in alignment, then they don't work. They don't work for the nation when they don't work in the home, and they don't work in the nation when they don't work in your neighborhood or family. And much of what we're trying to pass off here is not just bad policy; it's just a bad way to live life.
Yeah, you know, Jocko Willink has a podcast, if anybody's ever heard Jocko, but one of the things he says he's famous for is discipline equals freedom. And I'm really good at discipline on some things, and there's other things I'm not. And I love on the things that I'm not disciplined, I love to blame it on Brandon or Eric. I mean, because I can't be great at everything, so it's got to be somebody's fault, right? And so I wish somebody could go burn the calories. And I like to show everybody the things I am disciplined at. Look at the stuff I'm good at. Have you saved your money? Look at the stuff I'm good at over here, over here. Look over there. Eric, the floor is yours, sir. Any final thoughts or topics?
Yeah. For those of you listening to this and still have a question in your mind, you're going, well, I still think $15 an hour minimum wage is going to be helpful for some people, and we should consider that idea. That magic adjustment to what the economy would actually pay people, why don't we make it $45 an hour? Why not make it $150 an hour? If it was $150 an hour or even $45 an hour, then those people would all have a living wage, right? Then they would make plenty of money. Well, think that through. If you understand enough about economics, that if we raise the minimum wage that much, how much is it going to increase the cost of the items you want to buy? How much is it going to drive up the cost of the economy? Or how many people is it going to put out of work? Well, if you get it, if I say it's $45 an hour, it's only a slightly less problem at $15 an hour, but the same problems are going to be there.
Yeah, I'm trying to, I can't find it, but go look it up. There's somebody out there, and I just posted the article with the pros and cons. If people want to go back and read where I was getting some of that stuff from, there's somebody that just proposed, I can't remember it, that a permanent, is it $2,000 or $5,000 a check a month to families? He's talking about it. I'll find the article and send it to you both privately, and that way you both can print it and burn it and throw it in the garbage and make yourselves feel better.
Actually, Clint, I just saw a survey the other day that the Hoover Institution did, and there's something like 40 to 50% of Democrat voters are now in favor of a guaranteed universal income of like $1,000 a month or something, just free, so that we'll just tell people you don't have to work, that you can just get your free money.
I love free. And by the way, Brandon, if you have any of that free money, can you send me some, please?
I didn't get any damn free money. Somehow we missed all the free money that's come out here lately. I don't know what that's about. But
I don't think it's free.
I don't know.
Buy my lottery ticket, Clint. I'll give you 5% of whatever I win.
Dude, I'll take it. I'll take it. Hey guys, thank y'all both for joining in, and we'll try to come up with some special topics down the road. And Brandon, I know you're super busy, so I really appreciate you jumping on. Eric, I know you're super busy, and I really appreciate you jumping on too, man.
Good seeing both of you guys. This was fun.
Likewise.
Yeah.
Bye, everybody. Thank y'all.
See ya.